Hey guys, Dan here, and welcome again to that paintball channel. For this episode, we're going to be doing a follow-up review on none other than, that's right, the Planet Eclipse GMEK. Oh yes, ain't she lovely? She is indeed. Now, as most of you know, last year in December, Planet, Jack especially, were gracious enough to get me a prototype out so that I could do some testing, put it through its paces. And at the time, I gave it a very glowing review, and I said that I would absolutely own one of these. And now, of course, I do. But one of the tricky things with doing an early review like that is, in the interim between prototype and production model, you start to second-guess things. You start to wonder, did I overinflate this? Did I overhype it to myself, to viewers? Is it going to be possible for the production model to live up to the hype of the prototype and the expectations? So that's a real concern. Well, now that I've had this long enough to really get a feel for it, I can say with confidence that, unfortunately, no, the final production model doesn't quite live up either, to the prototype or probably my my expectation or my memory of it. No, yeah, of course it does. Of course it does. What were you expecting? This is just like the prototype. The only difference is, of course, that the final frame has been brought up to typical Planet standards. And I have to say that you've got to hand it to a company that is able to crank out with such reliability and consistency a product that is itself so reliable and consistent. I'm not just talking about the GMEK. I'm talking about Planet stuff in general. Just the quality control is always absolutely top-notch. The fit and finish on these things is perfect. The anodizing, always spot on. The machining is so clean. The parts actually fit together and they flow nicely together. And just the attention that goes into little details like, threaded parts, how they screw together is just a joy. Everything is so well made. It just screams quality, and you can see it, you can feel it. Things, little details where most people probably wouldn't even notice, wouldn't care about. They take time to put a radius here, transition there, and you've just got to appreciate that level of attention to detail. And I would say to the entire, industry, you really need to bear in mind that those of us who are out here who care about quality are always going to respect those who take the time, the effort, the money to produce it. There is no price that can be put on respect. And so, Jack, the rest of the folk at Planet, hats off to you. Highest marks. Well, back to the review. So I'm not going to say too much more than I said with respect to the prototype. This thing functions, performs just the same that the prototype did. But there were a couple of details that I wanted to talk about, one of which was something I forgot to mention in the initial review, and something else is a detail that has come up since the production model has been out and people have had a chance to work with it. Now, the first detail that I wanted to address last time but forgot has to do with the low force bolt. Now, the degree to which you can get a good low force bolt is the degree to which you can get a marker that is going to more reliably handle paint. And of course the GOG Enemy has a low force bolt, but there's a couple of issues with it that I don't like. First, you pull the trigger and there's a lot of hissing and sputtering, and it just operates in a relatively inelegant way. It's effective and functional, but it could be more refined. The other thing is, as you pull the trigger, the bolt goes forward with quite a bit more force than I would care to have. It will pinch paint, but really brittle paint, it's a little sketchy there. And the other thing has to do with the fact that so long as you're pulling the trigger, that bolt stays forward. And so one of the questions was, does the GMEK do the same thing? Well, as it turns out, yes, the bolt will stay forward so long as you pull the trigger. Now, in the previous review, I mentioned the way that this works is the valve just initiates the cycle, the engine runs forward, comes back. Well, if you've got something, an obstruction in the breech, and you pull the trigger, that cycling of the engine gets disrupted. So as long as you're holding that trigger, it will stay forward. Now, it's much more elegant and refined than the enemy is. You know, there's no leaking, there's no sputtering. It just quietly goes forward. You let go, it comes back. And the force, it's a little lighter than the enemy is. I would probably put it comparable to something like the Resurrection autococker if you've got the LPR dialed down, you know, so that it will pinch paint. So it's similar to that. Not quite as soft as Simon's Gentle Touch Ram is able to give you in terms of a low force bolt, but it's reasonably low force, and it works very effectively. I've had zero issues with it. No paint broken whatsoever, and using pretty fragile paint in it. So that's good. Now, another thing that has come up has to do with the trigger, specifically the side-to-side play that some people have complained about. Now, I can understand from an aesthetic point of view wanting this to be really, really tight-fitting, and you don't want any kind of wiggle. But to put this in perspective, the wiggle is not that much. It's only about 1 millimeter on the bottom. The way that the trigger is shaped means that it wiggles a little bit more on the bottom than it does on the top. Now, you could take that out if you wanted. You could get some shims, modify shims, and get them on the shoulder screws, and you could remove all the side-to-side play if you wanted to. But there may be some reasons that you might not want to. If you think about a trigger that would just have no wiggle room, no side-to-side play, what that means is that there is no margin for error when it comes to any debris or junk that might get in there. Now, Planet have done a really good job of masking the action of this trigger from anything getting in there. There's just a very tiny opening there for the top of the trigger to go through. But as you all know, if you've been in this a while, if junk and dirt and debris can get someplace, it's going to. And I think it's worth noting that part of the design philosophy that Planet goes with has to do with functionality, which means that they will from time to time build things with a little extra slop to accommodate a variety of maintenance issues, a variety of playing conditions. Because I can imagine being in something like a scenario, a tournament or something, maybe you've taken multiple hits to the trigger area, maybe you've taken some dives, you've got some debris, junk, dirt, paint, whatever, and yeah, you've cleaned it off on the outside, but you've not had a chance to really get in there and clean it out. If there's no possible margin for error in this trigger and it's tight, having junk and debris in there could mean a problem. You know, I could see, because this trigger is so light, not a lot of force bringing that thing back, that you could potentially pull this and it gets stuck back. I have shot autocockers that have had that issue where you get some junk into the action of the trigger, and because the trigger is so tightly set up, you pull it and it won't come back forward. And that's an annoyance. And it's not simply an annoyance. If you're in a competitive situation, that's a killer. So my guess is that Planet deliberately built that slop in there to ensure that the thing is going to reliably function every single time. And I can say, you know, you might not like the side-to-side play, but I don't know of anybody, myself included, who's out there, you know, just railing away on this trigger and thinking, oh man, this marker is so buttery soft and smooth and quiet, and it shoots fast, and it's efficient, and it's a great stable shooting platform, and man, love that. But you know, this side-to-side play on the trigger, I mean, I just can't deal with it. It's just bringing me down. I mean, you're not even thinking about that. Who cares? You know, you can't tell while you're playing it. It's just something that is, when you're sitting there in the room with it on a bench and you're looking at it, that it might be a little bit annoying. But these are markers that are meant to be played with. They're not meant to just be showpieces. So, you know, those things aside, I have to say, this is an incredibly impressive marker. And I'm really just going to go out on a limb and say that this is an apex marker. This deserves a place up there with the automag and the autococker. You know, for all the years of mech play, there's never really been a third candidate that's been a serious contender. This deserves a spot as a third apex marker. It may not have the glorious artistic beauty and complexity and tunability of an autococker, may not have the brutal, bulletproof, indestructible reliability of an automag, but when it comes to doing what it does, shooting paint efficiently, quietly, quickly, this marker is second to none. It is as good as anything and better than most. And if you're out there, as I said before, if you're on the fence, you're thinking about this is absolutely a marker that you should consider. So, hope that was useful. Looking forward to the next episode. Come on back, bring a friend.